I'm Harv Nagra. I'm an operations consultant, a former in house agency operations director, and head of brand communications at Scoro. Welcome to The Handbook, the Agency Operations Podcast, a space where we talk to fellow experts and operations leaders about agency life, discussing the challenges keeping us up at night, as well as strategies that help make things run a little bit smoother. Hi all, welcome back to the show. Organizational change is something that every business and every agency needs to go through as it grows and evolves. The systems and processes that might be right for one size or stage of growth might no longer be effective and might actually impede your growth going forward. As operations folks, it's our responsibility to look for those signals and introduce change when it's required. But change is hard. A common reference in the business world when discussing the human reaction to change is based on the Kubler-Ross change curve. It was developed in the 1960s by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross to describe the process people go through during grief and bereavement. That is heavy. Since then, it's been adopted in the business context to describe the stages people go through when facing change in the workplace. Think about that for a second. The model that describes the way people deal with change in the workplace is based on a model that describes the stages of grief and bereavement. It just goes to show how visceral and stressful change can be. So the stages of this change curve, they are shock and denial, people's defenses go up, and productivity drops. Next, we have anger and depression. This can start with frustration, morale can dip, and apathy can set in. And then finally, we move into acceptance and integration. This is where the darker emotions can subside, and there's acceptance that this is the new way of doing things and we just need to carry on, and hope and optimism start creeping back in. All of this just goes to highlight the point that if you want your change to stick and be successful, then you have to put in the effort to plan, execute, and follow through in the right ways. There's a lot of areas where change may be necessary. There could be new leadership that you're bringing in. You could be changing your business model. The agency structure could be changing. The systems, technology, and processes you use could be changing. Today, we're going to focus on tools and process, but broadly, the discussion applies to any kind of change. On a personal level, I enjoy the challenge of a change program. One major project that comes to mind is many years ago at a previous workplace, the agency maturity wasn't at a particularly high level, and there was a lack of consistency on process and procedures. So there was a huge educational exercise we had to undertake to brush people up on the terminology, let alone how to do things. An example that comes to mind is educating the team on what a purchase order was and why it was important, in addition to how to actually raise a purchase order. Another example from that era, there was a huge amount of inconsistency in terms of time tracking. The account managers and project managers were just not used to doing that. So really having to sell that in, I'm sure you can imagine how difficult that was. Another example that comes to mind is that multiple times over my career, I have had to bring in a new system that forms the basis of how you run your agency. And people are going to have to learn processes from scratch, but I've seen it succeed. So I'm excited to get into the episode today with our guest, and we'll both be sharing examples of change programs that we've executed in the past that have worked really well. So an opportunity to tell you about our own experiences. The guest today is Claire Quansah. Claire's got nearly 2 decades of experience in the agency space and has worked with household brands such as Greg's, Asda, and Pets at Home. She's a big deal in the PR agency space, serving as a judge for various industry awards, and was named on Provoke Media's Innovator 2023 list. With her consulting business, Quansah Consulting, she supports other agencies with their operational needs, including offering training and workshops. So let's get into it. Claire, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. We're looking forward to it.
I love talking to ops people about how they got into the space. So maybe you could tell us about your start in agency land and what led you to operations.
Cool. So I am an agency person through and through. So I started out in a PR comms agency, kind of fresh out of university. So very much client facing, working on campaigns, PR campaigns in a range of different sectors, kind of B2B stuff, consumer stuff for a very long time. So I've worked in different agencies for around, I think it's probably nearly 18 years. I was working in different kinds of agencies, either big global groups or smaller independent ones in London and up here in Manchester. But kind of towards the latter maybe 5 years or so of that, that's when I started to move more into, I guess, a formal kind of operations role. So I've always been kind of very organized, that person that kind of likes organization and process, but not necessarily process for process sake, but like to have that smooth way of working and whatnot, and trying to look for ways to make things easier to deal with for people. I think it's very much that people focus that I like, in terms of trying to find ways to make things easier for people to get their job done so they can focus on doing their actual core work rather than faffing around with stuff in the background. So because of that kind of that natural interest in the way I just happen to work, or I'd naturally be trying to solve problems for the agency or spotting things that we could do better, I was then given an opportunity by a former MD to say, okay, then why don't we formalize this? So rather than me just kind of firefighting and trying to solve problems, off my own back, formalizing that process. Yeah, basically. Which was a great opportunity. It wasn't necessarily something that I was gunning for or trying to get to, but it's just great to have somebody that spotted that and said, okay, then let's try and formalize it and turn it into proper role. So I spent some time still client facing, but then at the same time doing the operational stuff, and really enjoyed it. And then after that, I went to another agency, and whilst it wasn't a particularly operational focused role, it was setting up a team and a function. So that was setting up a business development and client development team and function. So they'd never had that before. So that still gave me an opportunity to bring in some of that experience of processes and priorities and workflows and things to make sure we understand how different teams are going to work together, and how my team would then work with the other core divisions of that business. And it's kind of, the rest is, as they say, is history. And then obviously, and after that role, I set up on my own to kind of do it my own way, and to look to see how I could help other agencies really in terms of solving their own operational needs, to help their teams to be able to do their work and have a more enjoyable workplace.
Excellent. So we're talking today about change management with a focus on platforms. I understand, Claire, that you've spent some time in agencies bringing in new systems and selling that change in. Is that correct?
Yeah, and obviously, in agency world, different types of agencies, there are going to be different types of platforms and solutions and tools that people use. And I think one thing is the idea of getting a tool or a platform into a business is great, because it can often give you the idea that you're going to solve lots of problems, but there is a process that goes along with it to be able to get, more bang for your buck, and to be able to make sure that you're using that new platform in the best way that it benefits both the business and also the team. And it can be a challenging process if it's something that's quite new, but doing it the right way, you can definitely start to gain and see some of those benefits. But as I say, it's a process and it's a journey, and it can't be taken for granted that you can just bring something in and, hey, presto, it solves all your problems.
Absolutely. I was mentioning in the intro how big a deal change can be to people. The stages that people go through and the vocabulary there's words like shock, denial, anger, depression. It's so powerful. And it just goes to show how unsettling change can be for people. From my experience, it doesn't really matter how good people are at their jobs, how senior they are, or even what the change is. It could be a very small thing, but you see people digging their heels in and kind of grumbling at the beginning. It's always the case. And of course, depending on how big the change is, the bigger the reaction and the resistance. Is that what you see? And if so, why do you think people react that way? Why do we react that way?
Well, I mean, it's human nature. We like to be comfortable. We like to know what's going on. And I think that the problem with change is that it disrupts us, doesn't it? So it disrupts that status quo, it disrupts where we're comfortable. Often it's that kind of, I guess, that fear that people often have, because if they don't know what's going on, they then start to have questions. So when it comes to things like, whether it's technology or even other things, is something going to make my job harder? Is it going to make my role redundant? People start to get fearful. The shock is because when something comes out of the blue, so they don't necessarily understand that. I think it's also that point around not necessarily knowing where things could go. So it's that,
Hmm.
the fear of the unknown as well. So things being uncertain. But yeah, as I say, it's natural. It's a natural reaction. You think about when working with children, people often say children like routine, don't they? They like things to be consistent because that helps them to feel secure. And I think that's the same for us as adults as well, isn't it? We like to know what's going on. We like to know how things work. We like to know what's going to happen tomorrow
Yeah.
because it makes us feel comfortable and confident. So when something comes in and disrupts that, it
Hmm.
makes us uncomfortable, and it takes a real kind of, I guess, change in your own way of thinking to be able to look at how you can embrace change a bit more. And it's the role of the people that are bringing in that change to help people feel as comfortable and as secure as possible.
If change is being brought in, there's probably an important business reason for it. Nobody brings it in. Nobody changes things just for the sake of it. Maybe,
I'd like to think so, yeah.
hopefully not. I guess the exception is when you have kind of a merger or acquisition or something like that, you might be forced to adopt something rather than choosing to go that way. In your experience, what are the risks of being really lax in the process of introducing change?
Well, the risk, obviously, kind of getting it all wrong,
Yeah.
wasting your time and your money. It's very easy to kind of just dump a new system onto people and hope that it's going to work really, really quickly and solve your problems. And if it doesn't, then you know what? You will be wasting time and money, not just on the cost of the actual system or tool itself, but people's time in terms of how they are using it.
Hmm.
So you have to really, really careful about that. That's why, a good change program will make sure that you're getting the best out of
Hmm.
it in the end. So yeah, you run the risk of wasting that time and that money. Also, again, there's that falling productivity as well. So people
Hmm.
aren't using something properly. Again, the way that they're using it is going to be wasting that time again, but your productivity is really going to drop, which kind of then probably then defeats the object of why you've invested in this tool in the first place. And I think that then links to things like people's own then frustration in
Yeah.
terms of the way that they are working, and they can get frustrated with the tool, they can get frustrated with the organization,
Hmm.
and confusion as well. So, is this really the tool that we should be using? Maybe I should go and find a new way of solving this problem. And if you start to get different people that, go off in their own way, you're then creating more issues yourself, aren't you? And then you end up not achieving the goals that you were trying to achieve before in terms of whether that's to do with visibility and insights,
Yeah.
because then you've got disparate sets of, siloed information, and it becomes even more confusing for everybody.
That is such a good example that it's just like completely counterproductive if people just give up and say, "Well, what you're saying doesn't really work, so I'm just going to go and invent something new."
My own way.
You're investing all this time and money into this new platform. We're in
Yeah.
the business of selling time, so yeah, if it grinds to a halt due to like kind of a lax process, then you've kind of shot yourself in the foot.
Yeah, completely, completely. And I think then once people feel that, once people feel that they are frustrated or they feel like this system hasn't worked,
Yeah.
then that can then dip into, well, it impacts how much trust or confidence they have in the organization for when
Hmm.
future changes are made. Because people then, like I said, people tap into previous negative experiences.
Yeah.
So if we're then say, oh, hang on, when we did this, it didn't work. It ended up, causing me lots of headaches. My team weren't being as productive. Everybody was still frustrated. There was no point in doing it. And now
Hmm.
you're telling me we're going to have to change something else again. I'm not going to be as open to it. I'm going to be even more
Yep.
reluctant to embrace it. And then it kind of is that domino effect, isn't it? So you're going to struggle in the future to be able to embrace changes. And getting it right can have a real difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm excited to dive into this. For the listeners, Claire and I have compared notes on the steps that we think are super important in a change program. And we're going to talk about some of our experiences and examples as well. So, really keen to get into it. Before we get into each area in detail, Claire, I was wondering if you wanted to kick off by listing what those stages are that we're going to be talking about.
Sure. So we've listed six
Yep.
broad areas, which will probably kind of link to other things anyway. But in
Yep.
general, so our first area that we talked about was communication.
Hmm.
Then we talk about that kind of planning and preparation piece, really,
Hmm.
really key. Implementation, obviously, how we go about actually, getting the ball rolling and implementing this new software or process. Testing of workflows,
Yeah.
which I think sometimes that can be forgotten
Hmm.
or overlooked or not taken as seriously. Creating documentation,
Hmm.
putting in that training and that support that people need to be able to get it into play. And
Yeah.
then the final and sixth piece in that process or in these areas are that follow through
Hmm.
and thinking about that continuous improvement. So remembering that it's not just a one and done, as people say, but you need to think about what's happening next once it's implemented.
All right. So let's get into it. Kicking off with communication. Who, what, when? Tell us about it.
So yeah, like I say, I think for me, I think communication can make or break the success of a change program,
Hmm.
because it's really, really key to think about it from the very beginning, not just kind of part way through the process.
Yeah.
So where possible, trying to get the right people in the room to start having those conversations to understand, well, what is the problem that we're trying to solve?
Yeah.
And why.
Hmm.
So who is this problem going to impact? Who is the potential solution going to impact as well? And
Yeah.
getting them to have those conversations to really understand so you can frame it in the right way. So, for example, yes, you may have senior people in the room because they're saying to you, actually, we need to get better sight of certain information, certain data. But actually making sure that your frontline teams also understand, well, this is why this is a challenge for us, rather than thinking that something's just being, thrown upon them. So having those conversations, understanding the scale of the challenge and who that problem impacts. And as I say as well, in terms of those right people in the room, you might want to also look at, I call them, may want to call them influencers. So who are the
Mm.
people actually within the teams that will be listened to by their colleagues? Who are the people, that are trusted, that can get that additional kind of feedback and insight from people, and
Hmm.
who could also maybe be champions for the program or for the change as
Yeah.
well. So it's
Building an
not,
enthusiasm.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you need someone who's got that enthusiasm, that's got that understanding, and that's got that trust. They've built that trust within the team and almost acting as that kind of middle person between maybe, the senior team and your frontline
Hmm.
colleagues as well. Is it that maybe the program needs almost like a sponsor? So maybe somebody, maybe senior who's also kind of leading that and talking about it consistently.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really important too. So it does feel like you've got everybody all in. But I'd also say, like I say, because it's not just around saying, hey, we're doing this change, it's an ongoing piece of work. So it's easy to just say, right, we're sending an email out to everybody. This is what's happening. Oh, right, we've communicated now. Job done. It's
Yeah.
not that easy. You need to have that consistent, awareness of what's happening, but
Hmm.
making sure that your comms helps people to understand, the what and the why and the
Hmm.
when, and be
Hmm.
clear around that timing too, and to help build people's confidence in the program and help them to feel confident and secure in terms of the way it's going about. And I think transparency is really important too, giving people that level, a comfortable amount of detail that they can deal with. But at the same time, if you are the leader, then you've got to do what you said you'll do. Again, that trust piece is really important. So if we are going to go about this, making sure that you are sticking by it and doing it. So there's a lot to consider in that communications piece.
Absolutely. Really, really good examples there as well. And I like what you're saying, that it needs to come from multiple levels, right? I've seen it work really well where the MD of the agency is the first to present it and saying, hey, this is why we're doing this and why it's going to help us and how it's going to help you as individuals. If you want the new tech and the new office and stuff like that, we need better visibility on
Yeah,
all this kind of on our profit and all that kind of stuff. And then getting the influencers to reinforce that. And that
yeah,
could be finance, that could be operations, but it could be those other champions or key people in the organization that are well liked and respected as well. So
yeah,
I thought what you said there was just really key. And keeping that program running, multiple channels, isn't it, as well? It could be an all hands, it should be reinforced in team meetings, and
yeah.
also email communications, keeping people updated on the process and where you're at. Okay, so we've activated our communications program and now we're moving into planning and preparation. Tell us a bit about that from your point of view.
Yeah. So planning, making sure that you've kind of understood what's a realistic timeline that you need to go through, but then also what do each of those key milestones look like? Who needs to be involved in those? So I think
Yeah.
obviously at the start of building your plan, understanding who's on your team,
Yeah.
who are the people that are going to be involved, and what their responsibilities are. Having those conversations with your supplier as well to ensure that you've got a proper and a robust plan in
Hmm.
place. The preparation piece as well, kind of thinking about what you need to do before you start the process. what needs to be in place, what needs to be considered, making sure that you are ready,
Yeah.
ready to hit go is really, really important.
Yeah.
And I think with that point, try to make sure that you're as inclusive as possible as well. So looking at what needs you need to consider, looking at your team, are there particular needs that you need to think about when you are going around this implementation process? Therefore, making sure you're giving people enough time to be able to prepare. One thing might seem like a quick and simple job to somebody, but to somebody else, it could seem really, really complex, So making sure that you are considering how people can go about that preparation piece, I think that's really important.
Absolutely. From my experience, it depends on the system that you're changing, but when you're introducing change, it's not just about bringing in that new tool, but it's a great opportunity to look at the way you're working as
Yeah.
well. It's the perfect opportunity for it, actually. If something's kind of feeling a bit broken, that new system's not going to automatically fix it. You might need to look at your processes and say, what are we overcomplicating, or what's missing in this piece that would make things flow better? So a great opportunity to audit your processes. If it is a system that manages your finances or your quotes or anything, looking at your quotes and saying, are we quoting in the right way? And rate cards, do those need to be reviewed? And when was the last time those were looked at? I think it's so critical that you look at these additional pieces that come into play and take the opportunity to optimize them.
Yeah.
That kind of extends the scope of work and it ends up being a bigger project. But I think ultimately it pays off because you took the opportunity to improve things before you roll out the new change.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because most things don't operate in a silo anyway. They don't
Yeah,
operate by themselves. So actually, if you are reviewing one particular system or process, it may well touch on or impact something else
absolutely.
within the business. So you're right. It's a really good opportunity to take a step back and say, actually, let's look at other things that we're doing to see how they might be impacted by this change or might be improved by this change. But actually, there could be opportunities for improvement elsewhere.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got the communication plan. We've formed our teams and outlined roles and responsibilities. We have put together the project plan and how we're going to attempt to tackle this. And then we're moving into implementation now. Can you tell us about implementation?
So, and I guess obviously it will change for kind of depending on what it is
Yeah.
that you're using and what it is that you're implementing. But I
Hmm.
think deciding what it is that you're going to be doing, with your projects. If you've got an old system, for example, that you were using, how you're going to be able to shift over to the
Yeah.
new one. So thinking about, for example, data that you might have to transfer, it kind of
Hmm.
maybe links back to that planning preparation piece, doesn't it? So from a data perspective, should you clean all your data? You probably, well, actually, I'm
Yeah.
saying, should you have, like, it's a question, you probably should clean all your data
Yeah.
beforehand, before then moving it over to
Yeah.
the new system. Deciding when to do something like that is also just as important. So
Hmm.
looking at, timing is really important. This is why it's, this is why I talk about having the right people in the team, because if you've got somebody that's more frontline, they're probably more likely to be able to advise on, okay, then this is the best time of the week or the best time of the month to start doing this type of transfer
Mm.
because we know it's quieter or there's certain projects and things that don't need to use the system. So
Yeah.
that point around team. So yeah, thinking really carefully around that process of when you switch over maybe from one to the other, do you have an opportunity to maybe work with both systems
Mm.
at the same time? Again, I think time is really, really is probably one of the key things there.
I think what you were saying there about running parallel systems, that just comes that's something that I faced in the past as well. Trying to make that decision: do we, on the day we go live, do we kind of cut everything off on the old system and everything's been moved over to the new one, or is it that the old projects continue in the old system and the new ones start in the new platform? So that's a tricky decision, but it's an important one to consider. And the other thing is about that importing data as well. That can be complicated. So making that decision on what's going to come in and testing to make sure it got imported properly and that kind of thing. Super, super key.
Yeah, yeah. I think the thing around running, whether you're running both systems at once, there's no clear answer, to be honest. Like, it depends on the type of tool that you are implementing. But if you
Hmm.
do decide to run two at once, again, being clear around, okay, then maybe are we going to have a cutoff point so people know this is how long we're going to be running both for? and considering, okay, what are the pros and cons of running both at once, and weighing it up in terms of, is it actually worth us running both? Maybe it could be a safer option to continue to run both. It's a really complex change. Maybe you do want to keep your old system running whilst you're getting used to the new one. So really, really thinking carefully around, okay, then what are the benefits? What will we gain from having both running versus actually just saying, we switch off on Monday and on Tuesday we're up and running with the new system, thinking about it really carefully. And both of those will require that really strong input from the people that are going to be using those systems on a day-to-day basis, because that could then probably change the way you will go about maybe some of your, and this is in the later stages, we'll talk about some of that testing and that training piece. They will probably be influenced by whether you decide to switch off and switch on versus running both at the same time.
I guess you were touching on it there, but testing workflows is kind of the next stage we outlined. And, would you do that yourself? Would you get I think you were kind of implying there that maybe you would even get the actual users to test those processes. Is that the case?
Yeah. I'd say definitely you want to kind of get people starting to get them used to using that process. So when you are testing, I'd say you kind of want to test your best case and your worst case scenarios. So thinking around, okay, then this is maybe, on a day-to-day basis, we might be using it like this, but what's almost the most extreme situation that we can think of? Will this system be robust enough? That's obviously a good question to ask at the very start anyway, when you are looking at what it is that you're selecting, but putting it to the test and seeing if it can really work in terms of the way that you want to work. And I think this is where those kind of ambassadors, those internal influencers can really kind of come to the fore, really, because they can be the people that say, this is your chance now. This is your chance to really test the system to see if it's going to work for us. And are there any gaps that we haven't spotted yet? Empowering the team to actually, this is your chance now to really work with it and make sure it's going to do the job that we need it to do and that you want it to do. So that's a really good opportunity for them. Testing is key because then you can make sure you're able to set up the right kind of workflows that are going to work for you on a day-to-day basis moving forward.
Definitely. And I think that this testing stage for me is so important. And the reason for that is you as operations director, first of all, have to have a lot of confidence about the way things work as well. And that when people come to you with questions, you have a very clear answer about why something is set up that way and how it works. So I think that's super key. And again, it goes back to what you were saying earlier, that kind of confidence you want to give people. There's an opportunity there to disappoint and it ends up not working the way you're saying it's working. And when there's that misalignment is where people are just going to stop listening and start just deviating and doing their own thing. So I think it's so important that you test every process and procedure, every bit of data there. Well, I'm exaggerating with every bit of data, but that you've spot checked your data so that you are confident that the way you're introducing the platform and you're advising people to use it actually works. So now we're moving into kind of creating documentation, training, and support. Again, something that I'm super passionate about. Claire, keen to hear what you have to say on this.
Yeah, my personal belief is that actually it's better to you start to create your documentation once you've done the testing rather than create documentation first and then then testing, get people kind of using it and everything and putting it to the test first, because then the documentation, it's more likely to be correct. And then you can be clear on the steps that people need to go through to be able to use whatever system it is that you're using. And then you can start to consider any questions or challenges that people might have, because that testing process has allowed you to spot particular gaps or challenges and things that people have. And that can be, when we say documentation, that doesn't necessarily be, Word documents or PowerPoint presentations.
Hopefully not.
With lists of bullet points. There are different things that you can use to create that bank of resources that helps to support people. My general thing is I use TTP, tools, templates, and processes. So specific tools, but then templates as well. So a template might be, you can copy this and use that in other places. And a process might be more to do with steps and things. So like things like videos can also help. So anything that can help people to be able to just refer to how I can use this piece of technology easier. So as much as possible, really, really robust and be able to address questions and challenges or anything that you've spotted that can help them to build their confidence in when they're using it, to avoid any gaps or any shortcuts and things, building people's confidence and people's knowledge, to make sure that they can use it properly.
And I think your point about making it kind of user friendly is super important. So not like really laborious and hard to absorb, but things like
Yeah.
video. In my experience, what I've seen work really well is that, when you're introducing the system, doing like a big training session, I think it
Yeah.
could be one session or multiple sessions, but just walking through the whole workflow and the way something works. And in my view, like, asking people not to take notes, but just listen and absorb what they're seeing. So they get a high level view of what the system is for and how it works. And then what I've done in the past in our agency handbook, created a catalog of little bite-sized videos on literally like every process or procedure that you might want people to start following. So, how do you quote from using templates? How do you turn those quotes into projects? How do you track time? How do you create a purchase order? How do you create an invoice? All of that kind of stuff. So that instead of going back to this 2-hour training session or 4-hour training session, people have these very modular, very small videos to watch that kind of shows them how, and they can follow the instructions.
Yeah, definitely. I think that goes back to that piece around being inclusive as well, because
Yep.
actually some people will prefer to watch a short video. Some people like, written document with bullet points and whatnot, but actually
hmm
a video with audio captions and whatnot could actually be better for other people as well, to help them to understand it better.
hmm One of the reasons I really love video also is that you have an opportunity in like 60 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever it is, to give a lot of context really quickly. So it's not
Yeah.
just about click here, do this, do that, but you can quickly introduce the topic and say, this is why we do it this way, and then follow the instructions. And then people have a very visual guide of what to do and follow as well. Back in the old days, I used to go for the kind of written instructions as well, but I find that people were less kind of excited about reading through those and following a bunch of bullet point instructions.
Yeah.
Surprise, surprise, versus watching these videos. And I think also important for, everyone to remember, things can change based on
Yes.
feedback or reality of rolling out the system and
Yeah.
saying, well, that didn't work that well. We're going to fix it. And, new questions will come up. So at launch, you might have like, 15 little subtopics of how to do something. But over time, as questions come up, creating another video. So your index is constantly evolving, being refined, and becoming more and more of a resource so that, all those FAQs end up in a new process that you can point other
Yeah.
people to, right? And this saves you from answering the same questions
All the time.
over and over and over. And I think it also prevents people from asking their neighbor. I don't know if that sounds harsh, but I would rather that people follow the official instructions and that becomes second nature. So I think having a resource like this, it ends up being that you can just point people to that and say, oh, it's topic 22 in the, how-to resource.
Yeah. If you make it easier for people to follow the process,
Yeah.
then they're more likely to do it. So by giving people that simple, short videos or whatever it might be, 3 steps to achieving whatever it is,
Yeah.
you're making it easy for them to be able to follow the process and to be able to use the tool, which then, like you say, more likely to then become second nature to them, which then means, as we said, that they're more likely to use it properly, which
Yeah.
means you're going to make sure you are getting the benefits that you originally wanted to get from implementing this new software.
I've seen that work so well, and everyone ends up becoming a kind of a process champion. So I'm a big fan of just making things really easy to digest and just keep continuing to signpost and point people in the direction of that resource so that they just learn best practice, and you'll be a very happy operations person, I think, as a result of that. So we're on to our final stage, follow through and continual improvement. So Claire, tell us about that.
So, like I said earlier on, you don't just kind of implement something and give people the how-tos, whatever, and say, right, that's it, job done. It's a continuous process to make sure that you're still getting the most of it. But I think one thing you can start to is looking, okay, then how can you reinforce that good behavior, which links it back to that point around pointing people back to the resources and everything, just for that consistency piece, continually reminding them, okay, then we've got this in place, try to use that to answer questions. If a question isn't answered, let us know, then we can then updated once we know how to answer that question.
Yeah.
But I think, celebrate successes as well. When something has gone well, when something, when you've got something that you couldn't get before.
Yeah.
Remember the objective you set at the start, we want to be able to understand X. So when you start to see those points where you do now understand X, let people know, hey, look, we can now see this type of trend or whatever it is, and start to
So
make people think,
yeah,
okay, then it was worth it. And
such a
also
good point
say,
there.
just show people it's working, letting people
Yeah.
see that it is really working and it's making a difference. And shouting out people that have been supportive of the process. So those ambassadors and influencers and everything, they can be used to actually celebrate what other people are doing, but also shouting them out as well for doing a good job. I think, again, it's a human nature thing, isn't it? That we like to be celebrated. We like to know that we're doing a good job.
Hmm.
And so letting people know that somebody's using the system particularly well, and
Yeah.
getting their insight as well, getting people's testimonials and feedback and whatnot. If somebody
Hmm.
can say, you know what, actually, I was a cynic beforehand, but now I found that I'm saving a good half an hour by doing this, by using this process, by using the system this way. That's great. So getting people's feedback,
Hmm.
I think, is really, really important. Getting their buy-in. And feedback might be negative. Sometimes it's understanding, okay, what challenges might they still be seeing, and
Yeah.
looking at how you can improve them. Again, it's that ongoing communication,
Hmm.
and then being able to offer that continuous support then. So if we are struggling, let's see how we can improve on it. Do we need to have more workshops or in-person training sessions? Or is it that actually we've forgotten to create a video on that bit? So let's create it. And just asking people how they're finding it. Again, just going to people and saying, okay, well, let's spend some time. How are
Hmm.
you finding it? What gaps do you think we still have or we might have? Is it a system problem, or is it actually a people problem? Not that people are a problem, but is it
Mm.
that actually they haven't quite grasped how to do something? So getting that better understanding and having that continuous conversation to be able
Yeah.
to make those tweaks.
Absolutely. And it's all about continuous improvement, right? It's not a set it and forget it. We're looking to optimize things and make our businesses run better. So
Yeah.
you can't just look at it like, we define this and that's the way to go. Periodically, whether that's monthly, quarterly, yearly, or all of the above, checking in and saying what needs to change because we've learned that there's a better way to do things.
Yeah, definitely. Continuous improvement is what it's all
Yeah.
about. So constantly looking at, okay, how can we make this slightly better? How can we make it slightly easier? How can we make it, a bit more informative?
Yeah, absolutely. So to recap, the key stages we've highlighted when making a big change are to communicate
Yeah,
early and often and consistently, plan and prepare, figuring out who your team is and what their roles and responsibilities are, as well as what kind of steps you're going to take to execute this program. And of course, moving into implementation. So actually doing the work and setting the system up, testing workflows. So making sure your data is imported correctly, the processes that you're going to be communicating to people are being tested and make sure that they work and what you're saying is going to happen is what happens. And then creating documentation for training and ongoing support and follow through and continual improvement as well. So that sounds like a really good plan in terms of rolling out a change and making sure that you're set up for success. Claire, is there any other advice you'd want to share with our audience on that kind of change process? Anything that we haven't considered or discussed above? Does anything come to mind?
I think when you are looking to implement, a new system or a new software,
Mm.
think about not just the problem that you're trying to solve today, but looking further forward. So what problems you might encounter maybe in 2 years' time, 5 years' time. So looking at, okay, this is the business as it currently stands, but what are our goals? What's our plan? So actually, if we have grown from a 5-person agency to a 10-person agency, and this is why we now want to implement this new system, well,
Hmm.
if our plan says that actually in a couple of years' time, we want to be a 20-person agency, do we then need to look for something that's going to support that vision of the agency? If our plan is to have more complex clients or certain types of clients, does this new system allow for that as well?
Hmm.
Can we find something that will help us to, as I say, address a problem of today, but also a problem of tomorrow? Obviously, you don't want to go too further ahead, but
Hmm.
looking, in terms of the direction that you're going in, making sure that you're not just solving a short-term problem, but making sure that it's going to help you in the future as well, so that you're not then in a year's time scrambling again and having to readdress it.
Really, really good point. Just making sure it's future proof, because that
Yeah,
like we've said today, it's complicated enough to make that change, and having to do it again in 6 or 12 months because it wasn't set up for kind of scaling is such a good point. So thanks for bringing that up. So Claire, it's been a pleasure speaking to you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak
thank
to us.
you.
And if somebody is listening and saying, hey, we've got this massive change program and need a hand, where can they find you?
Sure. So I am on LinkedIn like everybody else, Claire Quansah, but also quansahconsulting.com is my website, so I can be contacted there. But always happy to, I like to talk, as you can probably tell from today. So always happy to kind of have a chat with people to find out more about their challenges and changes that they're going through in their agencies.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Claire.
Thank you so much. It's been fun. Thank you for having me.
So that was our episode on change management with Claire Quansah. Heads up, we're also launching a corresponding newsletter to the Handbook podcast where we'll be sharing key takeaways from our weekly interviews. So be sure to sign up for that at scoro.com, clicking on the main navigation menu, and then clicking the link for the handbook. And if you know anybody looking to introduce a big platform or process change, then please do share the episode with them. And as always, if you've got something you want to share with the ops community on this podcast, or there's someone you think we should speak to, or there's something you want us to cover, then we'd love to hear about it. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. My name is Harv Nagra, and I look forward to hearing from you. Have a great week, and we'll see you in the next episode. This podcast is brought to you by Scoro, a platform designed for agencies and consultancies, which allows you to manage your projects, finances, and resources, all from one system. This is a platform I brought in at a previous workplace, which completely transformed the way we worked, and which I've recommended to clients of my own. You can sign up for a free trial on scoro.com. That's SCORO.com. Or reach out to me, Harv Nagra, on LinkedIn if you'd like to hear about some of my experiences.